Welcome to Beyond the Data. I'm Dr. Phoebe Thorpe, here to talk about dengue and chikungunya, diseases that are carried by mosquitoes. And with me is Dr. Mark Fisher from Fort Collins, Colorado. Thank you for joining us, Mark.
Thank you.
The Aedes aegypti mosquito we heard a lot about today. It has some different behaviors, like it likes to rest on cloth and hide in closets. What are some of the other unusual behaviors it has?
Well, Aedes aegypti mosquitoes and other similar mosquitoes live in and around the households where people live and in water sources around the households. They also tend to bite more during the daytime. That's their peak biting time, and that's a little different than some of the other mosquitoes that we're used to having that transmit other viruses here in the United States.
Okay, and then we have had some recent cases of dengue in our own backyard in the United States. Can you tell me, what can we do to protect ourselves and our children from mosquito-borne diseases?
Yes, well, dengue is a problem throughout tropical areas in the Americas and Africa and Asia, but we have had some recent cases in some parts of the United States, Florida and Texas. People can take some precautions to prevent exposures to mosquitoes. They can use mosquito repellents on their skin or sometimes on clothes and materials if they're out camping. They can also dump water sources that are around their houses, like flower pots and kiddie pools and in gutters. Those are the places where the mosquitoes live and breed. Then, when possible, they can also wear long pants and sleeves to protect themselves from mosquito bites. Finally, when inside, if they have it, they can use air conditioning or have intact screens on windows and doors to keep the mosquitoes outside.
Okay. And another disease we heard about today is chikungunya. That seems to be a disease that not as many people are familiar with because it's more recently come into the Americas. What can you tell us about the spread of that disease and the disease itself?
So chikungunya is another virus that's spread by mosquitoes. It was first identified in Africa in the 1950s, and that's where the name comes from a local African language. It caused disease in Africa and parts of Asia for a number of years, and then in the early 2000s started spreading further to other parts of the world. Didn't come to the Americas until 2013 when it was first identified in the Caribbean, and then has spread in 2014 throughout much of the Americas, including a few locally transmitted cases in Florida and cases among travelers returning from affected areas in the Caribbean and South America. And it causes fever and severe joint pains in people who are infected by the virus.
And you know, one of the things I didn't hear you speak about, sorry to circle back, but one of the things I didn't hear you speak about is bed nets, because I'm sure that a lot of people hear mosquitoes and they think of prevention as bed nets, a way to do that. Why doesn't that work with the Aedes aegypti mosquito?
Well, bed nets are a very effective means of preventing certain mosquitoes, especially ones that bite at night, like the mosquitoes that transmit malaria. They're important ways of preventing these mosquito-borne diseases like dengue and chikungunya, but they're less effective because, again, many of the exposures to these type of Aedes mosquitoes occur during the day when people are in or around the house.
That makes sense. And tell me, what is CDC doing to help educate people, especially healthcare providers, about dengue?
Okay, so CDC and our partners at WHO developed an online training for clinical management for healthcare providers, and that's available to people. It's a free training that they can get online.
That's at the CDC website?
That's right.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Fisher.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us, and join us next time for Beyond the Data.
I bet some people watch these ads and say, that could never happen to me. I don't smoke that much, so I'm not really a smoker. Well, I didn't think I smoked that much either, but I still got oral cancer, and it came back twice. Now I have no jaw and no teeth. My tip is, if you smoke, you're a smoker, just like I was.
You can quit. For free help, visit cdc.gov/tips.
My name's Emily. I grew up in DC, and I've been back now 6 years since I graduated from college.
I'm Caroline, and I'm a stay-at-home mom of 2 boys.
Caroline is my older sister, so in general, I go to her for advice with different things in life.
Auntie Em is amazing with the kids. She's an awesome aunt, and she just really loves them. My mom was diagnosed with cancer January 2012. And that was actually the year I was engaged and planning our wedding. She had triple negative breast cancer. My mom was a BRCA mutation carrier. I was like, I need to know. So I went in and I met with the counselor. She went over all my risks, and I was 50% chance I could get it or not. I took the test and was positive for the BRCA2 mutation.
So I just decided I would do the same. I also found out that I had tested positive. I had my sister who went through it and we're really close. So I had that person to kind of talk to about more of the emotional side.
When I began the monitoring process, I had the mammogram and the breast MRI, and they found something suspicious. My doctor said that she would like to do a surgical biopsy to test it further. At that point, I said, well, if I'm going under, let's just do it. So I decided at that moment to have a bilateral prophylactic mastectomy. I didn't want to be so anxious. So that's why I decided to go that route, because it would just been on my mind.
It was a really good decision for her, but it's not a casual surgery. Being single and young and not really knowing what my future held, I knew that I wanted to just continue with surveillance. I didn't feel settled enough to really take that on, or didn't feel emotionally ready for it. But as I'm getting older now, I kind of feel like I'm getting there.
I think Emily's on a great path, and we're both very supportive of one another. My mom's always been very like, you gotta do what's right for you. Go with your instinct. Everybody's different, everyone's unique, and you gotta take all the data and your life and what's going on and kind of figure out what works best for you.
Today, we hear a lot about sexual violence, stalking, and intimate partner violence. How common are these types of violence throughout the country? The National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, NISVIS, collects data among U.S. adults at the national and state levels. NISVIS is unique in that it is the first survey to collect state-level data, and it is the only ongoing survey to examine health impacts of violence. This survey helps us understand how common these forms of violence are, and it provides data that informs policy, programs, and practices to reduce the occurrence of violence. We know prevention is possible. For reports, fact sheets, and more, visit cdc.gov/violence-prevention/NISVIS.
Antibiotics aren't always the answer. Antibiotics save lives, but many times they are prescribed when they aren't really needed. Antibiotics are only needed for treating certain infections caused by bacteria. Antibiotics do not work on viruses, such as those that cause colds and the flu. When you're given antibiotics when they aren't needed, they won't help you, and the side effects could still hurt you. To learn more, visit www.cdc.gov/antibiotic-
Intimate partner violence is defined as physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, and psychological aggression by a current or former intimate partner, and is preventable.
Intimate partner violence threatens the well-being of millions of people and their families every single day. Intimate partners may include current or former spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, dating partners, or sexual partners.
Intimate partner violence can occur between heterosexual or same-sex couples. Some victims may suffer just one experience, while others endure violence that lasts for years.
1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men have experienced intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And 1 in 10 high school students have experienced physical teen dating violence, which is a form of intimate partner violence.
Intimate partner violence consequences are widespread.
It impacts physical and mental health. It results in billions of dollars in medical, mental health, and lost work productivity costs.
But the good news is that intimate partner violence is preventable. We have strategies that can help you prevent this problem in your community. We can prevent intimate partner violence by teaching safe and healthy relationship skills, engaging influential adults, working to prevent violence starting in early childhood, creating protective environments, strengthening economic support for families, and supporting survivors to increase safety and lessen harms.
A dozen years ago, the idea of having a cancer genome atlas was kind of controversial. Not everybody believed that we would learn that much about cancer by looking at DNA, because we knew there would be a lot of misspellings of DNA that were not necessarily relevant, and figuring out which ones were was going to be a big challenge.
To do this well was going to require an enormous amount of investment.
It was sort of a dream. Can we figure out how to do this? Can we do this? And we found out that we can.
There's real value to go beyond what we're comfortable with. Go outside the box. Don't just look under the lamppost. Search through the genome.
One cancer sequence might tell you something. Thousands would tell you a lot more. TCGA was set up to take that idea and scale it up. And that's what has happened in a pretty amazing way.
The goal of TCGA was to characterize the molecular changes that happen within cancer cells.
TCGA was the first one to comprehensively map these molecular alterations in a large set of human samples for many different kinds of cancers.
Now 11,000 cancers, 33 different cancer types, all in the public domain for everybody to learn everything you can about what causes this disease and what we could do about it.
When we started, the idea was that we were going to find 4, 5, 6 genes that will have alterations in the 40, 50, 60% range. What happened was we were finding a lot of genes mutated at a very low level, but then looking at them in concert with their function, we rapidly understood that the important part was not the genes themselves, but the pathways that being altered.
Genes code for proteins. Proteins don't work alone. They work together in complicated machines called pathways or protein complexes. So one of the things we've been able to do with TCGA is to bring those data together across hundreds of patients across all cancer types and really get a better sense of what those pathways are.
The large sample size and the genomic throughput also allowed us to discover far more cancer genes than what was appreciated before. The genes that are frequently mutated in cancer are often not unique to one cancer type, but rather across cancer types. That's behind the idea of a basket trial in which patients are not enrolled based on their histological cancer type, but rather what mutations that their tumors have.
Using not just mutations, but using the gene expression data, using the methylation data, we've been able to develop better subclassifications of individual cancers and see that in many cases they might respond differently to treatments.
The classification that was put together by TCGA clearly indicated that there was a subgroup of low-grade gliomas that had a highly malignant potential, and they were treated as the regular low-grade gliomas. Today, the patients are being treated and followed up differently because they get classified in the correct group. That is a big success.
There's not just being able to classify patients into groups, but we're getting much greater insights into the molecular mechanisms for those different classifications. Those mechanistic insights can, further down the line lead us to perhaps better treatments for those individual patients.
Some of these discoveries have led to new therapeutic targets and even new drugs and biomarkers.
New drugs that respond to or interact with or in other ways influenced by the genetic variation in molecular characterization.
TCGA set the stage for all of that. Without it, I'm not sure where we'd be in precision medicine for cancer today.
This was a team effort of the most wonderful sort. Nobody worried too much amongst the scientific teams about who was going to get the credit.
So much of it involved teams at every level. Teams in the genome characterization centers, teams in the genome sequencing centers, teams in the analytics. So team science reached a whole new level with TCGA.
It serves as a proof of concept that this kind of team science setup could be hugely successful and impactful for cancer research. And it has steered people's mindset towards a more open and sharing research philosophy.
The group came together with strong leadership and literally learned how to be collaborative in an effective way, because we had an objective and we have timeline to deliver the data that the public is waiting for.
it's worth doing resource-type projects. When I mean resource-type projects, are projects that have not a very narrow hypothesis, but they go to create a resource of data that can be mined for hypotheses.
And that's an important output of TCGA as serving its mission of providing a resource that will support basic research and drug development.
And this rich repertoire of data could be mined in many different ways to address different questions that each investigator is interested in, and he or she can then study it in more depth. And now, after a talk, I often hear people ask the speaker, what does the TCGA data show for this particular gene that you're interested in and for this cancer type that you are studying?
It is only logical that all the data created should be given to the community at large. And when I say the community, it's not just the scientific community, but the patient community, patient advocates, anybody that can interpret the data. TCGA has followed that model. In fact, TCGA has pioneered that model. We were releasing the data to the public way before the papers were being sent for review.
This model have supported the interrelated and subsequent effort in epigenomics, in proteomics. All those are very important next step to enhance and enrich our understanding of the genome.
It's just the different creative ways that people are now using the data. It's publicly available. Anyone with the interest and expertise can go start looking at these data sets and try to discover new things.
I try to remind people when the project started, the cost of doing a whole genome sequence was hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars.
It now costs about $1,000 is one of the reasons that this has become possible. And frankly, projects like TCGA, because they drove the technology to become cheaper and they drove the analysis to become more tractable, are one of the reasons why genomics is now being applied to lots of other diseases too.
What TCGA did, because of the scale of the project, was to really push all the technology developers out there to really up their game.
How do we best do variant calling? What are the different standards you should use when doing RNA sequencing in cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that's going to have an impact in the field and sort of pushing everybody forward to a certain set of standards that's going to have a huge impact.
We have that foundation now of understanding, which we did not have 10 years ago and which will stand for many years to come.
Whereas an entire field, the entire field of cancer genomics, the entire field of genomics is in a different place now than it was before the program.
With that team working with patients and patient advocates to see how all of that information can be translated to patients, it's magic.
The data is just a little part of the legacy. The legacy is a change in the mindset and the opening of the door for other projects of this kind.
I have to give a shout out to the incredible dedication of the scientists who made this possible and to the patients from whose cancers these tissues were derived. Everybody believed in the vision that this could transform our understanding of cancer. They agreed that data had to be generated with the highest possible quality so that other researchers could count on it being right. And they agreed to give the data away so that everybody else could start working with it right away. That's a noble enterprise, and so much credit to the thousands who worked to make this possible.
U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, cancer.gov, 1-800-4CANCER. Produced January 2018.
When a multi-state foodborne outbreak is detected, CDC works quickly to collect as much information as possible to find the source, so we can take action to prevent more people from getting sick. To do this, public health and regulatory officials gather 3 types of data during an investigation: epidemiologic, traceback, and food and environmental testing to link illnesses to contaminated foods. Epidemiologic data takes several forms: patterns in where and when people got sick, and past outbreaks caused by the same germ. Interviews with sick people to look for foods or other exposures happening more often than expected, and discovery of clusters of unrelated sick people who ate at the same restaurant, shopped at the same grocery store, or attended the same event. The second type of data is collected through an investigation called traceback. Officials look for a common point of contamination in the distribution chain from farm to fork. We review records collected from restaurants or stores where sick people ate or shopped and conduct inspections in restaurants and food production facilities and on farms looking for food safety risks. Then there is food and environmental testing data. Scientists look for the germ that caused illness in a food item collected from a sick person's home or a retail location, or in the food production environment. We analyze lab samples to determine if the DNA fingerprint of the germs found in sick people can be linked to the germs found in food or production environments. Health officials evaluate all these types of data to try and identify the source of the outbreak. We take action when there is clear and convincing information linking illness to a contaminated food. Health officials warn the public. Companies recall contaminated products. And restaurants or food production facilities might close temporarily. CDC is dedicated to constantly improving the ways we investigate and solve foodborne outbreaks. For more information on CDC's efforts to prevent foodborne illness and keep Americans healthy and safe, go to cdc.gov/foodsafety/outbreaks or cdc.gov/pulsenet.
Well, this year we have very good news because overall we are observing that the pattern of drug use among teenagers in the United States is continuing to go down, and it's most notable, for example, in the case of opioid drugs. And this is, of course, of great interest because we're amidst of an opioid crisis. So there's been concern that teenagers would also be starting to take these drugs and suffer the consequences. But in fact, we are observing, for example, some of the lowest rates of opioid use that we have been monitoring through the survey. So that's very good news. But we're also seeing continued decreases in cigarette smoking that are at the lowest levels that we've ever seen. We're seeing decreases in the other illicit substances. The only area where we're not seeing decreases, and we had observed that last year, is marijuana. So that despite the fact that drug use is decreasing basically across most of the drugs, marijuana is quite stable. An area that we need to monitor very carefully is that more and more teenagers are using vaping devices in order to take drugs. Among 12th graders, the past year use of vaping is 27.8%. And now we're asking through the survey what substances are they vaping. And out of those, 18.8% of 12th graders reported that in the past year they vape nicotine. Why is this important? Because nicotine is addictive, and studies have shown that when teenagers start to vape nicotine, then they are at much higher risk of smoking tobacco, of transferring into combustible tobacco, which is of course associated with very negative medical effects. And to the extent that we do not know what is the nature, how well they know what they are taking, and how easy it is once you start vaping a flavor to transfer into the drug, these are behaviors that we need to look out very carefully.
Did You Know video series from the National Cancer Institute, Risk Factors for Cancer. Did you know that a person's age, lifestyle, environment, genetic makeup, and family history can increase the likelihood of developing cancer? These are called risk factors. Advancing age is the most important risk factor for cancer. The median age at diagnosis for all cancers combined is 66 years, and 1/4 of new diagnoses are in people ages 65 to 74. Many risk factors are related to a person's lifestyle or overall health. Excess body weight contributes to 1 in 5 cancer-related deaths in the U.S. Obesity increases the risk of breast, colorectal, and other types of cancer. Carcinogens are substances that cause cancer by damaging DNA. One common example of a carcinogen is tobacco, a proven cause of cancer. A person can be exposed to tobacco by smoking cigarettes, cigars, or cigarillos, or by using snuff or chewing tobacco. They can also be exposed by inhaling tobacco smoke from smokers nearby. This is called secondhand smoke, or environmental tobacco smoke. As depicted on the screen, smoking accounts for at least 3 out of 10 cancer deaths in the U.S. Tobacco is most infamously associated with lung cancer, but it also causes throat, stomach, pancreatic, and many other cancers. Drinking alcohol increases the risk of developing cancers of the mouth, throat, esophagus, larynx, liver, colon, and breast. The more a person drinks, the more likely they are to develop cancer. The risk is even higher for those who drink alcohol and also use tobacco. Environmental and chemical carcinogens are responsible for up to 19% of cancer cases. Individuals may be involuntarily exposed to carcinogens if they work in certain mining, welding, agricultural, manufacturing, printing, or painting industries in which they are exposed to substances such as those shown here. Exposure to these substances may lead to many types of cancer, including lung and bladder cancers and leukemia. Natural and artificial UV rays from the sun or tanning beds can increase the risk of developing skin cancers, including melanoma, basal cell skin cancer, and squamous cell skin cancer. Some viruses, such as human papillomaviruses, hepatitis B virus, hepatitis C virus, and several others can increase your risk of cancer either by damaging DNA, causing chronic inflammation, or weakening the immune system. It's important to be aware of your risk factors, even those you can't prevent. For example, inherited genetic mutations play a major role in 5 to 10% of cancers. In breast and ovarian cancers, certain mutations in the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes are well-known risk factors. Genetic tests can tell whether a person has one or more of the inherited mutations that are known to increase cancer risk. However, not everyone who inherits the mutation will develop cancer. Talk with your doctor about genetic testing if you think you may have inherited a mutation that increases your cancer risk. You can also ask about prevention and testing related to HPV, hepatitis B and C, HIV, and other infections. To reduce your overall cancer risk, maintain a healthy weight through proper diet and exercise. Protect your skin from the sun, and don't use tanning beds. Don't smoke or use other tobacco products, and limit alcohol intake. For more information on risk factors, go to cancer.gov or call 1-800-4-CANCER. For more cancer statistics, go to seer.cancer.gov. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. Produced May 2018.